The radar screen at the Naha Command Center in Okinawa suddenly glowed red with hundreds of signals. They weren't fishing boats, nor civilian aircraft. They were moving at tactical speed. At dawn, the most dangerous moment of any war. In the East China Sea, dozens of Type 726 hovercraft landing ships tore through the calm surface of the sea. They were shielded by a wall of steel from Type 052D destroyers. Target, Utsurijima, the largest island of the Senkaku archipelago, or as Beijing calls it, Diaoyu. This is not a patrol. This is an invasion. The so-called maritime are in fact elite Marines of the People's Liberation Army. They launch a lightning-fast amphibious assault. Just minutes later, the red flag with 5 stars is raised. A temporary defensive perimeter is established. Japan Coast Guard vessels attempt to approach, but are immediately blocked by Chinese Coast Guard ships. Monsters disguised and armed with 76mm cannons, aggressively ramming and obstructing them. Tokyo activates the hotline. The U.S. Japan Security Treaty is invoked, facing its most critical test in 70 years. Decades of stability. And now Washington receives a call at midnight. The entire Western Pacific command structure has just been turned upside down. The world holds its breath. War has never felt this close. China's lightning amphibious force is not alone. The greatest mistake any analyst can make is to underestimate the scale of an operation meticulously planned by the East Sea Fleet. This is not a spontaneous act. It's a calculated mind game. Providing cover for the Type 726 hovercrafts is a formidable force, with its flagship, the Type 055 destroyer, a behemoth, a mobile fortress worth billions of dollars, escorted by 3 Type 052D destroyers and multiple Type 054A frigates. But the greatest threat doesn't lie on the surface. Beneath the foaming waves, at least 2 Type 039C diesel-electric submarines lurk, improved Song-class submarines, silently guarding the vital maritime routes. Ready for an anti-submarine warfare scenario, Beijing's intention is crystal clear. Strike fast, win fast. They want to create a fait accompli, an irreversible reality on the ground. They want to plant their flag, build fortifications, and place the entire world, especially Washington, into a situation already decided, before the Pentagon can even react. But Beijing miscalculated one variable: Tokyo's response. At this historic moment, the Japanese government did not wait for a call from their ally. Across the Pacific, they realized a bitter truth. If they didn't act immediately, they would lose this island forever. Their pride, their sovereignty, and Japan's entire southern defense structure were under threat. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force was placed on highest alert. From the Sasebo Naval Base, Japan's most powerful warships began to roar. The Maya-class and Kongo-class destroyers, carrying the heart of the Aegis combat system, immediately left port. They did not head straight for the Senkaku Islands. They were forming a shield formation, a mobile wall of steel at sea, ready for the worst-case scenario. But that was not the counterattack. The real counterstrike came from the mainland. Japan activated its A2/AD, anti-access/area denial strategy, to defend and control its own region, a strategy they had been quietly perfecting for years, simulating exactly this scenario. From islands across the Ryukyu, especially from Ishigaki and Miyako, forward islands just a few hundred miles from Senkaku, the ground began to tremble. Mobile anti-ship missile launchers, Type 12 systems of the Ground Self-Defense Force, carefully camouflaged within forests or civilian warehouses, simultaneously moved into firing position. This is the very weapon China fears most. Not warships, not aircraft, but cheap, mobile launchers, hard to detect, yet carrying deadly firepower. With the order confirmed from Tokyo, the first volley was launched. Dozens of Type 12 anti-ship missiles, the improved long-range version, roared off their launchers, soaring upward, locking onto targets via satellite, then suddenly dropping altitude, skimming just a few feet above the sea. They were racing forward at high subsonic speed, dozens of invisible wolves hunting their prey. The Chinese amphibious ships. Japan's objective was clear: not to sink the Type 055 destroyer. That would be too difficult. But to bleed the invasion force by destroying the landing ships, cutting off logistics, and isolating the troops already ashore on Utsuri Island. Inside the command center of the great destroyer Lian class, The atmosphere thickened. The radar warning system of the Type 055 screamed in alarm. They detected the threat, but it was already too close. Electronic warfare began immediately. Type 055 and Type 052D destroyers activated powerful electronic warfare systems, launching waves of radar and infrared decoys while attempting to jam the active seekers of the Type 12 missiles. The sky was ripped apart by streaks of fire as the HQ-9 close-range air defense system, the Hongqi-9 aboard Chinese warships, opened fire. Interceptor missiles shot upward, trying to form a wall of fire to protect the fleet. Several Japanese Type 12 missiles were destroyed. Others lured off course by decoys, but not all. At least 2 Type 726 landing ships were hit. 2 massive explosions rocked the formation. The damage was real. China had bled, but the East Sea Fleet was not one to be intimidated. They struck back immediately. Not only did they defend, they retaliated. Chinese destroyers opened fire all at once. Anti-ship missiles, YJ-18, the Yingji-18. This is a fearsome weapon, a 2-stage missile. It cruises at high subsonic speed, but when it nears its target, the warhead separates, making interception nearly impossible. The YJ-18's targets were the Maya and Congo-class vessels. Japan's Maya and Congo destroyers were forming an Aegis shield. The missile duel officially began. Japanese warships with advanced Aegis systems started tracking and launching interceptors. SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors were fired. The East China Sea sky in an instant became a hell of metal and explosives. Both sides were trying to find the enemy's limits. Meanwhile, on tiny Utsuri Island, Chinese Marines had landed. The sound of waves was gone. They only heard distant explosions. They understood their retreat had just been cut off. Immediately, they scrambled to establish hardened defensive positions. Man-portable air defense systems were deployed, ready for Japanese helicopters. Anti-tank missiles were placed in deadly choke points, although they did not know which. On this barren island, they prepared for a fight in confined space, a battle for survival. The strategic effect of this first strike was clear. Japan had proven that it could both the capability and the will to defend its territory. They had used their A2/AD strategy to perfection, turning their own islands into unsinkable aircraft carriers. The Type 12 strike was meant to send a clear message. Any force approaching the Senkaku will pay with blood. For China, they had achieved their initial goal, landing on the island. But now they faced a daunting challenge. How could they sustain this force? The recent missile exchange was a test to see how far Tokyo was willing to go, and more importantly, a test to see how Washington would respond. Beijing's eyes were fixed on the clock, not the one in Tokyo, but the ones in Hawaii and Washington. They were waiting. Where was the 7th Fleet? The silence from Washington was finally broken. At the White House, a brief statement, but one that carried the weight of steel, was issued. The President of the United States reaffirmed to the Prime Minister of Japan that Article 5 of the U.S. was ironclad. Any attack on territories under Japan's administration, including the Senkaku Islands, would be met with an immediate U.S. response. It wasn't a warning. It was an operational order. At once, the world's largest military machine began to move at terrifying speed. From Yokosuka, America's largest forward naval base, came the order. The aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan roared to life. The nuclear-powered vessel, a floating steel fortress weighing over 100,000 tons, was joined by Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers as they left port. They didn't move hastily. They moved at full speed, heading straight for the East China Sea. Their mission, to establish a no-fly, no-sail zone and choke off China. But this wasn't a war from a century ago. The 7th Fleet knew it was entering the deadly heart of China's A2/AD, anti-access/area denial strategy, a network meticulously built over the years. Thus, the assault would not come from one direction. Even as the carrier group advanced, the battle had already begun beneath the sea. Virginia-class fast attack submarines, the ocean's most silent hunters, had already taken up predator positions before they started actively tracking China's Type 039C submarines. A deadly sonar cat-and-mouse chase began. Whoever detected first would win. At the same time, from distant bases like Guam and Diego Garcia, the night sky was torn apart. B-1B Lancer bombers, the backbone of U.S. long-range strike, took off, carrying dozens of long-range anti-ship missiles. Simultaneously, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, armed with JSSMER cruise missiles, also departed their bases. They would fly across the Pacific, ready to strike command centers, radar sites, and missile launchers on China's mainland. If the conflict escalated, the United States was going all in. China knew this. They knew they had to stop the U.S. carrier. If the USS Ronald Reagan established a combat position, their forces on the Senkaku Islands would be isolated and annihilated. The People's Liberation Army Air Force received orders to scramble, and they played their trump card. The J-20 Mighty Dragon Stealth Fighter Squadron. From air bases in Fujian, dozens of J-20s took off. They did not fly alone. Supporting them were J-16 heavy fighters, serving as missile trucks, carrying large loads of long-range air-to-air missiles. Flying even higher were KJ-500 early warning aircraft, the brains coordinating the entire battle. The J-20's mission was to break through the U.S., hunt down and destroy the F/A-18 Super Hornets, and if possible, launch anti-ship ballistic missiles at the carrier itself. But the Americans were ready. From Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, a sound the Chinese pilots both respected and feared echoed, the roar of F-135 engines. As F-22 Raptors, the apex predators of the skies, took flight, scrambled for an emergency takeoff. At the same time, assault ships and the F-35B and F-35C squadrons, along with F/A-18 Super Hornets, took to the skies. They formed overlapping defensive layers. This wasn't a dogfight like in the old days. This was a 21st century battle, a war of data, of stealth and long-range missiles. The F-22 Raptors operated like invisible midfielders, with unmatched stealth and APG-77 radar, an active electronically scanned array. They flew high and fast, maintaining near-total radio silence. They detected China's J-20 formation from afar, long before the KJ-500 radar could spot them. But the new J-20s were no easy opponents. They were stealth aircraft too, armed with PL-15 missiles, long-range weapons designed to destroy high-value American targets. The battle began in cyber before any missiles were fired. Both sides attempted to jam each other's radar, racing to lock targets first. That's when America's tactics came into play. An F-35 acted as an airborne sensor, using its electro-optical system and advanced distributed aperture sensors to detect a flight of J-20s, trying to fly low to evade radar. The F-35 didn't need to fire. It instantly transmitted target data through the MADL data link and Link 16 network 50 miles away. An F-22 Raptor pilot, flying silently, suddenly saw his display light up with targets. He didn't need to activate his radar. He didn't need to search manually. The data was there. He simply pressed the trigger. 2 AGM-260 missiles, America's newest long-range weapon, dropped from the internal bay and streaked toward their targets at Mach 4. The J-20 pilots realized the danger too late. When his missile warning display screamed, it was already too late. 2 white trails erased 2 J-20s from the sky. But the remaining J-20 pilots quickly adapted. They realized they couldn't win. In a one-on-one fight against the F-22, they changed tactics. They ignored the fighters and accelerated past the sound barrier, diving straight toward the weakest link in the U.S. formation. Their targets weren't the F-22s, but the KC-135 tankers and E-3 Sentry AWACS, flying in distant orbits. The Chinese commanders knew that the F-22 and F-35 might be the sharpest swords, but they would be blind and thirsty without their AWACS and tankers. Lose the refueling aircraft, and F-22s can't fight for more than 30 minutes. Lose the AWACS, and the entire network collapses. A desperate chase began. PL-15 missiles were launched from maximum range, aiming for the slow-moving support aircraft. F-22 and F/A-18 Super Hornet pilots turned back, lighting afterburners to save their wingmen's lives. The East China Sea sky turned into a 3D chessboard where a single miscalculation, a single second's delay meant defeat. The air battle, the most crucial of the century, had only just begun. While the furious dogfight between F-22s and J-20s tore apart the skies above the East China Sea, and missiles and flares painted deadly streaks of light across the night, the true decisive battle was unfolding in a completely different realm, a realm without light, without sound, the silent war beneath 650 feet of water, while China's Type 055 and Type 052D destroyers gazed skyward, activating air defense radars and launching HQ-9 missiles to counter F divided by a -18S and LRASM strikes. They made a fatal mistake. They had forgotten the deadliest enemy of any surface ship. A submarine, a U.S. Virginia-class fast-attack submarine, let's call it. The Phantom had not joined the chaos above. It had been there all along, shadowing the most valuable target, the Type 055 flagship, Dalian, for 48 straight hours. The shallow, complex waters of the East China Sea are a nightmare for anti-submarine warfare. Noise from fishing boats, shifting thermal layers, and uneven seabed terrain all distort sonar detection. But for a Virginia-class commander, equipped with the wide-aperture BQQ-10 sonar array and cutting-edge signal processors, this was home turf. They heard the propeller hum of the Type 055 as clearly as a heartbeat in the dark. Meanwhile, the Chinese destroyer, though modern, was blind and deaf to the predator stalking beneath it. At the same time, the U.S. Japan coalition tightened its grip in key straits like Miyako. Japanese Soryu and Taigi-class submarines, with air-independent propulsion systems capable of staying submerged for weeks, formed an invisible wall of steel. They weren't hunting warships. Their mission was even more vital: to block every supply ship, every logistics vessel, every Chinese attempt to reinforce the Senkaku invasion force. The island was now completely isolated. From beneath the waves, back to the Phantom, the Virginia's captain received a single, encrypted message through the secure satellite link. 2 words: fire authorized. This was the moment that would change everything. Not the J-20s, not the F-22s, but a political decision, executed through torpedoes. Inside the weapons bay, 4 torpedo tubes stood ready. The captain calmly gave the order. No explosion, only a whisper, as the hydraulic launch system pushed out 4 heavyweight -48 Malawian Quach's ADCAP torpedoes. 4 steel sharks, each carrying nearly 660 pounds of high explosives, activated their engines. They shot forward at over 55 knots, more than 65 miles per hour. Faster than anything the Type 055 Dalian could possibly do to evade. Its towed passive sonar array finally caught a sound. But it wasn't a submarine. It was the shriek of 4 high-speed incoming objects. Torpedo alert blared through the command center. Panic swept the crew. The giant vessel, the pride of the Chinese, began a desperate hard turn, trying to swing its stern toward the threat. Anti-submarine rockets and acoustic decoys were launched in desperation, but it was too late. The -48 Malawian Quach's torpedoes were no dumb weapons. They were linked together by fire and guided by the Virginia submarine itself. During the initial phase, before their active seekers locked on, they ignored the decoys. They had their prey. The first 2 slammed into the hull, just below the waterline, tearing open thick steel plating. But the third was the killing blow. It didn't strike the hull. It made a final maneuver, diving beneath the Type 055's keel, and detonated. It was the breaking back tactic. The blast created a massive, superheated gas bubble. The shockwave not only shredded the hull, it lifted the 12,000-ton warship out of the water, then dropped it down again. The hydrodynamic shock, combined with the ship's own weight, did what no missile could do. It snapped the Dalian's keel in 2. The technological pride and command fortress of the East Sea Fleet was broken apart. A chain of secondary explosions erupted as missile and fuel stores ignited. The ship sank in under 5 minutes. This event surpassed even the air battle above. It was a devastating psychological and tactical blow. Losing a Type 055 flagship was far costlier than losing an entire squadron of J-20s. The entire air defense network of the Chinese fleet had just been torn open. But more importantly, the logistics chain, already fragile for the troops on the Senkaku Islands, was now completely severed. They were abandoned. In Beijing, leaders inside Zongnanhai realized they had underestimated not only America's resolve, but also the operational coordination of the U.S. Japan alliance. They had started a game they could not win. The Blitzkrieg plan had failed disastrously. Now they faced a war of attrition they could no longer sustain. The Marines on Utsuri Island, once the victors, had become hostages, martyrs of a failed mission. But in Washington, there was no celebration. Veteran generals stared at their screens. They had just sunk one of the most advanced warships of a nuclear power. Global stock markets, from New York to Shanghai, would lose trillions of dollars as the news broke. The risk of nuclear escalation, once a distant possibility, had become real. Both the victor and the defeated, in this lightning naval battle, suddenly realized they stood at the edge of the abyss. The price of this war, even at its beginning, was already too high. Now, the roar of -48 Malawian Quach's torpedoes had fallen silent. A dreadful silence hung over the East China Sea, thick with gunpowder and regret. Through an intermediary, perhaps Singapore or Switzerland, a temporary ceasefire was established. Beijing realized its landing force on the island was completely isolated, and its supply lines shattered by U.S. and Japanese submarines, leaving them no choice. They declared the operation a successful warning exercise and voluntarily withdrew their remaining forces from Senkaku to preserve regional peace and stability. It was a face-saving retreat. But everyone knew it was a tactical defeat. The U.S. and Japan declared a defensive victory. They re-established full control over the islands, but they did not pursue the retreating Chinese forces. No one wanted to push the confrontation further. The crisis ended, but trust was permanently shattered. The red line had been crossed and redrawn with the steel of a broken Type 055 destroyer. A colder new order had emerged. Japan no longer held illusions. Tokyo accelerated its plan to acquire hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles from the U.S. Its defense budget soared to record levels. They realized they could no longer rely solely on the protection of their allies' nuclear umbrella. The United States, though victorious, recognized the vulnerability of its large, concentrated bases. The Pentagon immediately pushed for a strategy of force dispersion away from massive bases like Kadena and bolstered the power of the 7th Fleet, especially its anti-submarine forces. What lessons can be drawn from this scenario, especially for a nation like Vietnam? First, the fragility of peace. A single miscalculation by a great power could plunge within hours. Second, the core value of the anti-access strategy. Japan's most effective strike didn't come from Aegis warships, but from mobile coastal Type 12 missile batteries. It proved that a nation with a long coastline and flexible, well-camouflaged shore-based missiles can inflict unacceptable losses on any invading fleet. Third, the war was not decided in the skies, but beneath the sea. The dogfights between F-22s and J-20s may have captured the headlines, but it was the strike from a Virginia-class submarine that broke the enemy's will and capability. The submarine remains the most powerful strategic deterrent after nuclear weapons. And finally, the lesson of self-reliance. The need for an active, self-sufficient defense posture, ready for the worst-case scenario. Because when the red line is challenged, only your own strength can serve as the ultimate guarantee.